Oh, snap. Oh, dip.
Oh,
As we
dang.
used to say. Oh, dang. We used to say, oh, dip back in the 80s on the East Coast, along with oh, snap. So it'd be like, oh, snap. And then somebody else would go, oh, dip. And that was what we would do. So that was kind of an East Coast thing. So whenever I say it to people who are on the West Coast, they're like, what? They have no idea what that is. But oh, snap
No
is still
idea.
around. You say oh, snap a lot.
Snap is
Snap.
yeah. I remember that being like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, snap.
Yeah, still around.
Except just not oh snap or just snap.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh,
You know?
snap was a
Yeah.
big.
I just remember
Like
the
New
kids
York.
being like, you like someone to punch the other person and be like, oh, or just snap.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
you got to throw in a little oh. If you're in New York, you'd be like, oh, snap.
What do the kids do these days? She
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. My son, every other word is cap out of his mouth. That's cap. That's cap. Cap means like that's
There you go.
BS. Like
Learning
that's a
something new
lie
every
or
day.
something. Yeah, that's cap.
Oh.
I heard Bob. That's cap. That I probably hear it 300-400 times a day. Well, welcome. Good to see you, Caleb. How are you?
Good to see you too, man. It's been a bit.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
It has.
I feel.
Yeah. Even though it's only been a week, it's like we're in a time warp continuum. You know, the pandemic has apparently ended very suddenly, and now we're starting to be presented in every news channel with the possibility of World War III. So every week we take this hour to forget about those things and just talk about cameras and flasks and things that go in flasks. And with that, I'd love to know what you're going to have to drink today.
Nothing too exciting this time.
Okay.
We're just back to whatever's on the bench, which this week is some Knob
Little
Creek.
Knob Creek. Beautiful.
Yep, Little Knob Creek, Little Water.
Yep.
This is the are all of them small batch? I always forget. There's so many versions.
Everything's
This
small
is the
batch
age 9
nowadays.
years small batch 100 proof.
It's probably
I think
bespoke.
that's just regular Knob Creek. I think it's just
so.
like the vanilla Knob Creek.
Pour it up.
So
wow,
that's what's happening.
You just went to like 12 frames per second for
Oh
a
my goodness.
moment. Holy cow.
That is accurate.
Yeah, and you're JPEG. You're being JPEG compression diced. If you have to pop out, feel free to do it.
Let's see if it goes, if it gets better. If I do
this. Boy, it's really funky there. No? Kind of not, but very nice.
See if that gets any better while you talk about what you're doing.
I am having from the lowlands of Scotland a dram of Auchentoshan. Not my favorite one of theirs. There's one called Three Wood, which I would say is my favorite. So I'm going to pour some of that. And then I do want to acknowledge everybody in the chat, which is what we should be doing, which is saying hello to everybody who's here. And also acknowledging the fact that our good friend and partner in crime, Ben Barden, is on the job. He was planning to be here today for the show, but we got a little notice from him about an hour and a half ago saying it's a no-go for me. So there you go. News shooter.
On that note,
sorry,
I might step out for a second because it looks terrible.
I don't know why. I'll go full screen.
Better?
It's a little bit better. Step out for a second. I'm ready for you. Yeah.
Wake up.
Okay.
Hey, wait. Oh, hey.
Oh yeah, you're okay. Hey.
I think it's coming back. It's coming back. There we go.
Okay,
it's improving.
I think you're good.
We'll just stay
So
here.
let's take a look at the chat. Matt Allard, news shooter, 45,000 word review of the GH6, which is very specific.
Shooter couldn't get the computer to recognize the camera.
Yeah, so Matt was going to come on the show. Matt, if that changes in the next 15, 20 minutes, just come in and we'll go to the 4-up display and you can come in and be part of the show, which would be lovely. Hi to everybody in the chat, GWiz, and anyone else watching. Does anyone know what the latency on the B? Okay, we'll get into that in a minute, I guess, but I don't know the answer to that. What the latency is with a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, 4K or 6K for live production through an ATEM. I don't know. Shouldn't be bad, but I don't know.
It'll be about the same as any other camera, any other mirrorless style, slightly slow camera.
Yeah, Matt was doing those tests with the GH6, and there was some delay over HDMI for that.
Yeah, everybody's delayed.
Yes.
Everyone's always like, "Oh, did they fix it?" And like, no, they're all the same. Although, yeah, I'd be curious to test that because it's a slightly different, HDMI 2.1 or 2.2. Is it HDMI 2.2? Matt would know. I already forgot.
There's
I think it's got
2.2 already?
no.
I didn't know we had 2.2. I knew we had 2.1.
Maybe
I thought that
it
was the
might be
latest.
2.2 or 2.1 Rev something special to get up to 4K 120.
Got it.
So the GH6 is spec'd to be able to handle 4K 120. The problem is there's no, like, even though Atomos announced it, there's no real way to do that yet. Like, there's no standard right now.
Got
So
it.
it's kind of like whatever that looks like. Though there's no official standards there.
Well, remember when they announced RAW over HDMI? Well, cheers. Slanja.
Yes, cheers, everybody.
Yeah,
thank you for all hanging out with
everybody.
us. To you, Ben.
Yep. Yeah, remember when Atomos first announced the RAW over HDMI to the Nikon camera? And it was like, oh, can this even work? And they were like, yeah, it's going to work. And I don't know how many months later it actually worked.
Years.
But in the beginning, yeah, it felt like forever.
Nikon announced it. They were like, we got it. We got video, raw video. And it was like, oh my goodness, full frame raw video. What? And then I think it was, I felt like close to a year later. I just remember everyone else had it by the time theirs finally arrived. Or they when you could actually record raw, I think you had a couple months and then like everyone or other people had it.
It's very Nikon or Nikon, depending on where you're from. Just dropped the email address into the chat for the photo challenge for next week. It's photoclub@thec47.com. And I have already gotten 2 submissions for next week's challenge. I've gotten the pictures, I've gotten descriptions. So thank you very much, Andrew and Travis, for doing that. I think Michael's coming up soon. He's right on the edge with the processing, and will he get his stuff back in time? I'm kind of in the same boat. I've got some rolls of film here that I'm dropping off tomorrow morning, and fingers crossed there's something on there that I like. But I got to tell you, the low light one is a bitch for me. I have not had any time to get out and do any stuff with that. So I'm going to try to sneak out and get a few more photos out tonight on this last roll I have. And maybe there's something I'm going to like, but I'm not very, I'm not feeling confident, but it's okay.
Yeah. I feel like I got a low light one, but I can't remember for the life of me what it was. Which has me concerned.
Okay.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Travis sends me this email. Oh, my cameras were broken and I didn't get the shots I want. And he's got these like beautiful photographs. I'm like, you ass. I don't mean that in a bad way, Travis, if you're in the chat, but I mean, like, I appreciate that, but there's some nice photos there. All right, Michael, hope it works out. Usually takes a week. It's going to be tight. I'd love everybody to get their stuff in by the 28th, end of day. Some of you Europeans over there have a little bit of a safety there. I can get it. Yeah, just try to get it in on the 28th if you can, because I've got to put everything together on the 1st and put it together so we can actually present the stuff. So, yeah, got to do that with my day job. So
28th, that's 5 days from now.
I know, man. It's tight. I mean, we
Walgreens,
have given everybody a ramp.
It's Walgreens.
Hey, you know what? It's going to be what it's going to be. Do they do same day there? The one that you have, one that has a lab in-house?
I think so.
You should check, because even yeah. One roll of Delta 3200 expose its ISO or ISO 1600. Michael says that's actually the roll that I have in my CLE camera right now. Is that, and I'm rating it at 1600 as well. So I'll be interested to see. Those are the last photos I'm going to take tonight. and see if I can get something, and then drop it off in the morning, and hopefully they can rush it. We'll see.
Nice.
All right. Cool.
What up, James? Good to see everyone here.
Hey, yeah.
So, how do you want to do this?
Well,
since Ben's out.
Yeah, there's no elephant in the room, but I think we should probably we're not scanning I'm not scanning negs, by the way. Oh no. Coffee. I'm having them. It is kind of pricey. Hey, welcome to 2022, where it costs $22 to develop, scan, and do 4x6 prints. But that's at a good lab. All right, we got some comments. So I think we should talk about the GH6. You know, you have your video up. It's clocking in at just over 15 minutes long. I think it's a very tight video. It really kind of very concise.
I try to make it as tight as possible.
No, really. It really just sort of like no fluff, getting into all the stuff, having to do that. That coupled with the new shooter article that Matt wrote, along with penning War and Peace, the sequel, and the next book in Dr. Zhivago. I don't think you really need to go much further to get at least the core information of what this camera is all about. Then you get the opinions and, you know, what people think about it. And it does seem to be, I would probably say to a certain degree, because it is a Micro Four Thirds camera, but it does, as you and I have discussed, seems to be a somewhat polarizing camera. There are people who haven't been interested in this space in a long time who are going gaga over this camera, right? You've got Tyler and you've got, Potato Jet. And then you've got other people who are just Debbie Downer on it. You know, they're going Eeyore if you get the reference. Oh, you know, and then other people who are haters. But that's the internet for you. That's the world we live in. So, you know, this is really your realm. I don't shoot a lot of Micro Four Thirds. I've done some projects that have been on the GH4, maybe shot one thing on the GH5. So I definitely wouldn't consider myself even anywhere near an expert on that. So tell us what, just give us the 50,000 foot and where you see this camera sitting.
Yeah. So Matt's article, which I love. I mean, I hope he can get his stuff sorted because it'd be great to chat with him about it too. And then my video, if you want the full enchilada. Otherwise, it feels peak Micro Four Thirds in that Panasonic has stretched what that sensor can maybe do as far as it can go. You know, I don't know how many pixels you can physically fit, like going forward. You know, I think the resolution is great. I really enjoy that I'm really digging 6K, that kind of 7K resolution sensor. I love having that much oversampling or being able to shoot at 5.7K. And I wasn't wild about it as much on the Blackmagic cameras because it's you have to shoot at those resolutions to get that frame. Often there will be a crop, and then you're stuck with either RAW or ProRes. So to have a camera that does compressed with a great codec, there's nothing you pick and choose what you want when it comes to your compression codec, and it's all there. It's fantastic. If you want 150 megabits, 422 10-bit or 420 10-bit, you can do that, or you can go full enchilada 800, megabit, giant file size. But it's I don't know, it's kind of the whole package. So the assist features are off the hook, and if you ever get a chance to mess with it, just all that little dumb stuff we have to play with other cameras, it's incredible. So toward the end of my video, I just run through a bunch of random stuff they added. And man, it's just such a pleasant camera to work with. The flip out screen, never having your ports be in the way of the screen, all the assist features. And for me, the big one is the sensor. Something about that sensor. And I was talking to Jem on the phone earlier today. It kind of reminds me of the Blackmagic Blackmagic Cinema camera, the 2.5K.
One of my favorite
Micro Four Thirds
sensors.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Every once in a while, every once in a while, there's a camera where you just point it at stuff, you shoot something, and you bring it in, and just something about it just looks really good and speaks to you. That's one of those. It's one of those cameras. And so what I've noticed, because I have no idea I didn't talk to anyone else while I was reviewing it, so I didn't know Matt had one. I figured a lot of these other folks had them, but I was like, just me and myself and the camera. And so then when I put the video out and started seeing everyone else's videos, it's really interesting because a lot of people were comparing it, and I even mentioned it in my video. Price wise, it's pretty close to a Sony a7 IV, but they're completely different cameras, so I wouldn't necessarily compare them. But a lot of people were, recommendation wise, and it really came down to full frame and autofocus, and that's just not reasons you obviously buy a GH6, but those aren't reasons why I would skip the GH6. So I don't know if you're looking for a technical overview, but I feel like people probably already know, the spec sheet. It's just a really, really pleasant camera to use. It feels like a little cinema camera. And a lot of people like, I don't want to use speed boosters, but man, that makes a difference. You're looking larger. You're larger than Super 35. So, I mean, if you just do that, a couple of $100 extra, let's say $2,600 for a larger than Super 35 camera that shoots 6K with whatever they're calling it, dynamic range boost, and all those other features, open gate mode. That's kind of nuts. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. I hadn't really, the speed booster side of things is definitely going to.
People are doing it with the C70 and with other cameras, so why not?
Sure.
I just love how people are like, I don't want to do that, and then the C70 comes out, and everyone's like, oh, I love it. You put a speed booster on it. So I really like the camera. I like it a lot, and my next video, I think I'm gonna get into the nitty gritty, comparing it to those cameras that people have been mentioning. A lot of people have been saying the S5. You should just buy that, which is Panasonic's full frame.
Yep.
Their latest release outside of this camera. Yeah. And the a7 IV.
Yeah.
But I really like to get into that and see what about this camera makes me feel fuzzy in a good way. Like good fuzzy feelings.
Those lenses, I like it a lot. Good too. You put a couple of those lenses on into your bag, and they're a 1.7, constant aperture. You can get some really nice images, and of course, or
these things, the Sue-Ray,
the anamorphics. Yep. Are you using the full frame ones with a speed booster, or
no? So the full frame ones are all of Sue-Ray's anamorphics are mirrorless only, so they don't have an EF version. So you can't really do speed boosters. So they're all like RF, L, or micro four thirds, E, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the older, the Super 35,
which you're not as much of a fan of.
Micro four thirds, except for two of them. So there's this one, which is the 35, and then they have a 75. Those are great.
The 50
is terrible.
Dog poo. Yeah.
And then the 24 is fine, but it's Flare City, and I don't know, it just feels kind of GoPro-y. But the 35 and 75 are where it's at for sure.
Yeah. So I like Frank's comment. Why would sensor size have anything to do with how you would shoot any camera? ? It's a good point. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the space you're in understanding depth of field and film plane size or sensor size. I'm very happy to shoot Super 35. It doesn't mean that I don't ever want to shoot full frame, but to me, the huge advantages of shooting with a larger sensor camera, for the most part, have to do with being able to shoot in smaller spaces, right? And still being able to get a shallow depth of field that you may want to achieve. And that sometimes can be a little bit of a roadblock when you go smaller sensor, depending on what you're trying to achieve with the image. But I do feel like there's a lot of attention that people put onto sensor size, sometimes erroneously, like
Yeah.
there's
I'm over
there's
that whole
yeah,
conversation too.
me too.
I think a lot of people are just really confused by the like it's Micro Four Thirds, it's $2,200. Like I saw some videos where they didn't even mention the dual game and the dynamic range. Yeah, which is too bad. And so I think a lot of people just look at the specs and maybe look at like how clean it is at higher ISOs. But I think the reality is people who appreciate dynamic range and, kind of like the soul of a camera, like the sensor and what kind of image you can get, we'll see past all that stuff. And I think it might be one of the first cameras that Canon has a lot of these cameras where like you look at it and you're like, "Bah, yuck, boo, overheating, this, that, and the other thing." And then everyone ends up using it.
Yeah.
Usually Panasonic is there's enough on, and I agree with what Matt and other people said. If you look at past Micro Four Thirds cameras, usually there's some massive leap, huge leap. GH4 was like first 4K camera, GH5, 4K 60, in-body stabilization. And then this one, you could say it's maybe not as a big leap like that. But I don't know, man. I think there's something special going on. So I can't wait to kind of throw it in with the A7S3, A7 IV, other full frame cameras and just see what's up.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the great thing about a camera like this and all the cameras that are coming to market, save for, your Venices and your, Alexa cameras and that sort of category, as once they're out in the world, they are very inexpensive to rent as well. So you can get your hands on these cameras and take them out for like a 3-day week and put them through their paces and really figure out, is this a good match for me? And you go to places like lens rentals and places like that. And sometimes you can, especially when a camera first comes out, they'll sometimes sell you the camera after the rental, so if you love it and you're like, this is the camera for me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think Matt said this, we've said it. There's basically no bad cameras out there. There are cameras that have advantages and disadvantages to one another. You're never going to get the same latitude that you're going to get in an Alexa sensor in almost every other camera that's out there. Some, yes, but most of them, no. And latitude to me means how far can you push and pull the image. It's not necessarily how many stops of dynamic range can be captured by the camera that are usable. It's how is the image, Matt's joining. How is the image, how can you actually push and pull it? So I think that,
that's a great
part of it.
Point. Huge point. Because a lot of people are just looking at the stats like, 10 to 11 or whatever stops people are finding. I can't remember what Cine D. What is their name?
Yes, Cine D.
They did their dynamic range test, and I think that number to me is meaning less and less when people are like, it's actual X amount of stops, because that spec means nothing when you start to actually grade it, depending on how you expose it.
Yes.
Because I felt like this camera was much better than my Sony's when you expose to the right. It just, I again, I'm going to do a full on side by side, but I just felt, and actually I think Potato Jet maybe had shown some of that stuff. Like you're getting more action in the highlights than on Sony. So even though Sony is technically the highest amongst these like mirrorless cameras,
dynamic range,
they have the spec that's higher dynamic range wise or the amount of latitude stop wise. But again, all that, it's all fun and games until you use it and mess with it. So Matt.
Hey, Matt.
Hello.
Hey.
Thanks for making it, man.
Oh, we can't hear you.
You muted?
We should have done a test. You're going to come back. It's going to happen. We're going to give it a shot. Almost. When I say almost, I heard somebody moving.
While he's setting that up, I know we'll probably keep talking about it with him and then we'll transition into all the other companies. But the other day I realized, who we haven't heard from in a while is those Fuji boys. It's been real quiet over there.
Yeah, real quiet over at Fuji.
I'm excited to see what's next. I think I hear Matt. You there?
1 2 1 2.
Oh yeah.
There he is.
There he is. There he is. Now we hear you.
Except not there. We can see.
Well, he went over to make an adjustment. So yeah, audio wise.
Okay.
I'll watch out for you. I just want to finish the thought on latitude because I think that it is important to discuss it. When you're shooting with a camera, depending on the camera that you're shooting with, you have to make a decision about how you're going to expose, right? So, okay, there's, X number of stops of dynamic range. But if you understand how your sensor reacts to capturing an image, then what you can do is you can, like for instance, the Alexa sensor is very forgiving, meaning that a lot of DPs and cinematographers like to expose at a level of what it is they want the final picture to look like. And I think that one of the reasons that people love to shoot with an Alexa is they can shoot in a lower light situation, meaning they don't have to expose to the right or to the top of a waveform in order to be able to push the image down or adjust it down in terms of hiding things from the shadows and things like that. There's a lot more latitude in an Alexa sensor than there is in a lot of the sensors that are in less expensive cameras, mirrorless cameras and things like that. There's also a lot of other behind the scenes stuff, dual gain, the things that the GH6 is doing. To me, what's important is understanding that sensor and understanding how to expose for it. If I had my way, I'd want every sensor to be like an Alexa sensor, where I'd say, I want to light this scene a certain way, and I want to expose the scene that way. And there's very little adjustment in post-production because that's the vision of the director of photography or the cinematographer. Unfortunately, that's not true with a lot of sensors. You'll have to feed them lots of light and then understand that you have to get your lighting ratios to still be where you want them to be. And then when you adjust the image down, you're getting to where you want the image to be in post-production. So I think that's where latitude in my mind comes in, and dynamic range really is a scale that says we can capture X number of usable stops from black to white in terms of what we're capturing. That's my way of defining it, and I think that I wish that every camera would allow anybody who's capturing images to A, be able to capture them the way they want, and B, in post-production, be able to push and pull the image to where they want it to be within reason. Alexa cameras are not low light kings, though, like some of the Sony cameras. But you have to shoot Sony a very different way. Now, welcome, Matt. Good to see you. From Japan.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, sir.
You might have to bump your levels just ever so slightly, but they're looking pretty good. Go ahead, give me a sound check. We usually do this before the show.
1 2 1 2 1 2 3 4 5 6 7.
Yeah, pretty good. I think we're okay. You could probably bump it a little bit. Maybe when Caleb's talking, I'll go full screen with him and you can just tweak it just a little, but it's good. How is it in Tokyo?
Apology. Not too bad early in the morning. Apologies for the technical monkeys.
That's all right.
I was actually trying to use the GH6 for this, which I actually am now, but it was causing me some issues. So it took a while to get it to work.
Well, good to have you here. Yeah, good. Well, we've already been talking about the article and the fact that, if people want the technical information on this camera, it's for sure on New Shooter, and you have broken it down into, I don't know if it's one of your longest reviews ever, but it sure seems like it. I've seen some long ones, but this one is up there, Matt.
Yeah, it's pretty long. I didn't have that long with the camera, so I wish I could have actually done some more because I was trying to juggle this in between my normal day job. So it was a lot of late nights putting some of this stuff together. But yeah, I think it's an interesting camera. It's fully featured, provides good imagery. I think as probably people have talked about before, I think probably the biggest stumbling block when it comes to the GH6 is that a lot of previous Micro Four Thirds owners, I think, left the system and moved to, say, Sony or Canon, and with that, they probably sold their lenses as well. The biggest problem with any camera system is that once somebody sells their lenses, if they happen to be native lenses that work with a particular system, you've lost that person, because it's very hard to get that person to come back. If you're already an existing Micro Four Thirds owner, you've got a bunch of glass, and the GH6, obviously makes a lot of sense, and it can compete with a lot of the full frame cameras out there in terms of specifications and features. And I think, as someone was saying before, sensor size doesn't make a huge difference depending on what you happen to be shooting. In some ways, and for some applications, Micro Four Thirds and having the greater reach is actually a good thing. I think we get caught up in this whole sort of everybody needs full frame, and I don't think that's necessarily true for what you're doing. And with speed boosters and things like that, yes, you can sort of change the look of cameras like the GH6. My biggest concern with the whole Micro Four Thirds moving forward is that you've really only got two companies making cameras now, and whereas everybody else has sort of moved to full frame offerings, and they're putting out cameras what it seems like every 6 months. There's lots of models out there, and the prices have come down. The other problem that the GH6 is potentially going to face is that you have to make it competitively enough priced, and it has to offer better features for people to actually look at it again. I think currently on B&H you can buy an S5 with, I think, a 85mm 1.4 prime for about $800 less than what you can get it mightn't be that much, it might maybe be $500 or $600 less than, say, the GH6. So it's this whole thing about, it doesn't matter whether the camera's better or not. Often it comes down to the bottom line of people looking at something and going, I'd prefer full frame, and I'll just get this because it's obviously, it's cheaper, or I think the industry's moving towards full frame, so I think I'll go with this camera instead. So I mean, that's basically my thoughts on the GH6.
Yep. Are you hearing dropouts there, Caleb, a couple of times?
No, it's totally good on my end. His levels sound good.
I think I know what it is then.
That's a good point.
It's my stupid
I'd be
Bluetooth.
Really...
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Keep going.
I think it'd be really interesting to know, like, do a poll amongst GH shooters, and if anyone's in the chat, let me know how many of them actually use Micro Four Thirds glass. Because of all the people I've spoken to, and myself personally, I do own some, but a lot of the time it was adapted stuff, and that's one of the cool things about it. Is because the autofocus is so terrible, no one's linked to any particular lens, system for that camera, and because the sensor size and the mount is so flexible. I mean, I feel like everyone who had that camera, the GH5 back in the day, had a 18 to 35 and a bunch of random lenses they were adapting. And don't get me wrong, that's one of the beautiful things about the system. Is smaller lenses, and the price is interesting because the problem is, like you mentioned, cameras are getting more affordable, larger sensors are getting more affordable, but there's still like a base amount. There's a base cost to making a camera, so it's not like Micro Four Thirds can keep getting cheaper to where, let's say it's $2,000 for the average full frame camera, and then Micro Four Thirds can be $1,000. Like, it doesn't work that way. They can only go so low before they just start losing money, and there's no room to keep dropping the price. Like to build a car, it just takes so much to get a frame, an engine. There's not a lot of headroom there that they can just chop that all down. So that's an interesting point that I hadn't thought of before as well. So yeah, there's definitely no like mind-boggling 4K 240 frames or something that made it, super duper unique. But I think when people see or mess with the sensor, I think that's where it's at. Did you have any streaking issues, by the way, Matt? Because there's that whole thing going around right now.
Well, in my opinion on this thing is that most CMOS sensors are susceptible to some type of smearing in situations like that. I mean, the thing is, nobody's actually going to shoot something like that. If you're shooting something where, into a bright light source like that, that's 7 or 8 stops overexposed and it's clipping your image, I mean, no one's going to do that. For a technical test, maybe it's fine. But yeah, I've seen that with plenty of CMOS-based cameras causing that sort of issue. So, while it's a valid point, in the real world, is that going to affect anything that you shoot? No, I don't think so.
Maybe it's Panasonic's black sun spot. Remember those days?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
What was that?
Yeah,
Black
yeah.
Magic, where like no sun is allowed in your shot, or moon.
Yeah. Sorry
Oh,
about
man.
being muted, by the way.
Or the
yeah,
S1H that had the blue, that had the problem with the blue clipping issue. I think eventually sort of got sorted.
And Canon had that. Was it the C300 Mark II, where purple, like bright purple RGB lights were straight up blue?
Yeah,
or something like that.
It was something weird. Yeah, there was some weird thing like that. Yeah, and good point on the price thing too. I mean, there can only be one Blackmagic, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean I can't imagine they're making a lot of money on their cameras. I think that a lot of that has to do with feeding it into an entire ecosystem. You know, when you're selling cameras at the price that they're selling them at, you know, albeit in a pretty horrible form factor most of the time, and hopefully that'll get resolved in the future. You know, I don't think camera companies can do that very successfully all of the time. So there's a you know, there's a floor. I wouldn't even call it the ceiling. There's a floor in terms of how low you can make a camera and actually, you know, make some money on it. So it seems like there's a lot of loss leader components to what Blackmagic is doing, and they've really improved their user interface, their software. I think they have some great codecs, and they are a company that if they could work out some things in terms of camera form factor, that they could, you know, really knock it out of the park in a lot of ways, I think, because they've come a long way. You know, your Z-cams of the world are not as attractive anymore because of what all of these other bigger companies are doing. You know, they were pretty exciting back in the day that they started to come out. But, you know, even taking a look at Red as a company with Komodo, you know, that's a pretty affordable camera system for what they're producing now in that space. So it makes it very hard for some of those Chinese companies to come in and compete effectively long term. Whereas Kinfinity and Zcam kind of were exciting for a period of time. But I think that's a tough space for them to be in. Whereas in the lens space, I think China is doing some pretty amazing things, you know, and if they can, you know, continue to improve on that and the quality control can stay relatively high, then it's giving users a lot of options in that space, you know, very different than what we were looking at even a couple of years ago, in my opinion. Yeah. So we take a look at a camera like the GH6, and you know, the original topic of this was, what if we owned these camera companies? And we're picking the big, you know, three. I'm not saying that Arri's not one of the big ones. I'm not saying that, you know, Blackmagic's not making a lot of cameras, but when we think of camera companies, Sony, Panasonic, you know, Canon, these are the ones that we're thinking of, I think, day in, day out for certain price points and user base, and they do all kind of go into the upper tier of the market as well to a degree. And if we owned these companies, what would we be looking at for our next, you know, cameras? What would we be thinking about for the roadmap for what would be being done? And I think we could probably start with the GH6 as an interesting camera because of all the mirrorless cameras, if we talk about that small form factor camera, I think that the user experience on the GH6, the GH5, the GH4 has sort of always been a little bit ahead of all of the other camera companies. You know, when you're talking about, you know, the video centric features, the assist features and things like that built in, the one thing that I think they've done incredibly well since the GH4 is they've put those features into the camera without having to feel like you need an external solution in order to get them. You don't need to go to an external monitor or an external monitor recorder. And of course, that has become very inexpensive. Look at that you know, the Andy Cine 5.5 inch monitor. The features that are in that for $280 US are amazing, but it's not in the camera. And not everybody wants to have something attached to the camera with another battery and all that stuff. So where do you two gentlemen and people in the chat, please chime in, put an @ the C47 there, think Canon should go when we take a look at a camera system like the EVA 1, right, which has not been revved in a very long time? Should they be looking at the GH6 as the basis for that, but in a super 35mm camera? Should they be looking at full frame? Should they be looking at more along the lines of what the C70 is, so you can, essentially use a speed booster and do other things with it, but keep it at a price point? What's some thoughts on that? Let's start with Panasonic. You own the company. What's the next camera? What are we doing?
I'll go real quick and then I'd love to hear Matt's thought. But S1H in a cinema body that isn't terrible, and if they could do something like they did with the GH6, where it's the dynamic range boost with an S1H sensor in a good body with some ND, I think that's where it's at. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I'm really concerned about Panasonic because their cinema division, sort of being gutted. All the key people who were there working in their cinema division have now left or moved over to Lumix.
Yep.
So that sort of tells me a lot that maybe they are going to abandon the cinema division altogether, because there's a lot of R&D required with cinema cameras and a lot of money that has to go in there. And if you don't own enough of the market share, it's very hard to convince your board to start allocating funds to invest into building new cameras. They haven't released anything in forever, and the EVA 1 was a really good camera, and I think they needed to follow up on that a lot quicker. I think the prime time to have released an EVA 2 or whatever you wanted to call it would have been when they started to release the S series Lumix cameras, because that's the other issue for people. If you're coming up through the ranks and you're starting off with a mirrorless hybrid camera, and say you want to go into the Panasonic ecosystem, where do you go from there? You buy yourself an S1H or an S1 or a GH6, for instance, and then it's like, where's the next step? You can't go to something else unless you want to buy a very old camera now, because Panasonic doesn't have anything in that lineup. Whether they released an EVA 2 now with an L mount system, whether it be full frame, I think you'd probably have to go full frame given what the market's doing. It would be hard to see who would suddenly jump on board that now, given all these other options we have from Canon and from Canon and Sony. It's really, in this industry, timing is sort of key. You have to be first to market or close to first to market to get on board, and then people would jump on board that system. If you're too late to the party, which Panasonic has been with a lot of cameras, particularly things like the VeraCam LT, for instance, another camera that was really great, but came out way too late and didn't get any sort of massive market traction. So for me, I don't know what they're going to do, whether they're going to build anything in the cinema space or they're just going to abandon it completely, and what type of camera that would be. They're making these little box style cameras now. Everybody seems to be going down that route of making a box. I guess, they released a full frame version of the BGH. I don't know what's called the BGH1 or BGS1. I don't know how successful that's been. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
But
Caleb.
That's literally what it's called. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
Something like the S1H, maybe with, ND, XLRs, that sort of thing, SDI would probably do okay, but I think it's just probably a little bit too late. And the trouble is as well with Panasonic, if you're putting so many features into mirrorless hybrids now, what are you going to do and put into a cinema camera that's going to make people want to use that at, maybe 2 or 3 times the cost?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I own the company now, and if I'm owning the company, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, Matt. And I'm saying, if we want to actually have people not abandon our cameras when they move on from our mirrorless cameras and they want to go to a digital cinema camera, we've got to come to market with a $5,500 to $6,000 camera that at the very least is Super 35, but ideally is a full frame camera coming out of the gate. They already have the S series, so they can do that. And I think that the big thing for me is that box, or whatever that form factor is, has to allow for the features that people would, and I think are going to expect going forward. So there needs to be a timecode port. There needs to be gen lock. There needs to be a robust, and this is the big one, because every other manufacturer that we're talking about is doing it, autofocus system, because that is something that people are asking for and need. And you know, they need to take the usability of a camera like the GH6, which is very easy to use, is well thought out in terms of the menu systems. And they need to take that to the next stage, because I think that that was one of the problems with the EVA 1. I mean, yes, it had a horrible, screen, and it had a horrible user interface. And here they already had the GH4 in the market when that camera came out, and it had a much better user interface. It had a much better user experience. It just didn't have the things that people were looking for in a digital cinema camera. So I think that what I would do is say, okay, here we are. And, yes, I do own a lot of Canon kit, by the way. I mean, Canon kit, and I'm answering kit. But I think that that's what they have to do, because I think it's exactly what you're saying, Matt. If they don't do that, and they don't do it quickly, then people will move to Canon, or they'll move to Sony, or they'll move to Blackmagic or some other ecosystem. You know, the problem I've had with Blackmagic always is they don't act like a camera company. So that's a hard thing. You know, you're buying the camera at an amazing price. You can buy 2 or 3 of them at that amazing price for the same price as some of the other cameras. But, they don't have the same support system. But as you're saying, that support system may or may not be there, going forward. There may not be the resources. And if a company like Panasonic is putting their resources into the Lumix area, because that's where they're selling cameras, then they'll have that part of the market. But they're really going to have to move fast with the full frame mirrorless and go to the next step. You know, we need to have built-in Vari-ND into these cameras. I think that, that's a huge win for Sony that really hasn't been replicated by anybody else. And they need to put some unique features, and it's that look that you're talking about, Caleb, as well. You know, one of the reasons that I loved Panasonic from the get-go with the DVX 100 series is yes, it's a little oversaturated. The colors are a little bit too much sometimes, but there was just a beautiful look at the time from that camera. And there are those magic cameras that have that. So that's where I'd go with Panasonic. So we move now, Caleb, to Sony. And we're talking about digital cinema cameras. We already have a lot of cameras in the line, FX6, FX9. We're going to focus on sort of that, realm of camera. We're not going to the Venice line here. What would you do if you were Sony right now, if anything?
For the cinema cameras, I'd love to see them kind of just refresh the Super 35 stuff. I know they're all about full frame right now, but it'd be cool to see essentially do what they did with their full frame. Where they had like A7S, FX3, FX5, FX6, do FS versions all the way through. And I love to see an FS3. So they've got the FS5, FS7, but an FS3 would be pretty interesting. So finally, for once, please make a, mirrorless style, more cinema oriented camera. Because those things sold like hotcakes, but they all had like horrible downsides. All those like A60, A6 enter number here, because there's so many. So that'd be kind of interesting. I'd love to see that and see what else they can add that's spicy there. Cinema camera wise, I mean, they have so many cinema cameras right now. It's nuts.
Yeah.
What do we got? Venice 9, 6, 5, 3, and then the A7 IV, A7S 3. So yeah, I think full or some kind of crop sensor offering. And I mean, I think they're doing pretty interesting stuff for Sony. I still don't really like love the image or color coming off of those, but they're pretty amazing cameras in the other departments.
Yeah. How about you, Matt? You own the company. What are you changing? Or you're running that division?
It's hard because they're in a good place at the moment, because they're obviously pretty much the market leader in that space. That mid tier where you're looking at FX3, FX6, FX9. So there's nothing that they really need to do, I don't think, currently at the moment. I think they'll just let those cameras breathe for a little bit. I think they'll probably continue to add some features via firmware updates, which Sony seems to sort of do with a lot of their cinema lineup. You know, sometimes it takes 2-3 years before a lot of the features come out that, you know, some that are promised, some that are not, that they end up throwing in there. They're in the unique situation, I guess, because they pretty much dominate the sensor industry. You know, they make, you know, upwards of 80% of the world's imaging sensors, so they're in a good place there. So they can sort of dictate, you know, a lot of what goes on in the market, because, you know, if you control the sensor industry, you're pretty much controlling the camera industry in part as well. So I think the next big thing would probably be to see what happens with sensor technology moving forward. We've seen lots of improvements, obviously, in low light and, you know, higher resolutions coming out. But, you know, dynamic range is still one of those things where we haven't seen like that next jump. You know, going back to, you know, the sensors that's in the Alexas, you know, that's, you know, 11 years old now, and it's still, you know, the most revered sensor in the industry. And you're thinking, well, hold on, how about it's been 11 years and someone hasn't been able to improve dramatically on dynamic range? Yes, other companies are doing different things with sensor technology, with DGO and dual gain circuits and that sort of thing. But, you know, when's that next big leap going to go forward? Sony's probably in a unique position to be able to invest a lot of money into that. Whether they will or not, I'm not sure. They probably could do something like bring out a purpose-made, maybe high-speed camera. That's something that I think, you know, would probably be reasonably popular if you could bring out, you know, a decent camera for not so much money, you know, as sort of more of a budget-friendly alternative to a Phantom or something like that. You know, that could do, you know, whatever, 800 frames per second or something like that in, you know, even if it was in HD or 2.5K or something along those lines. That could probably be popular. But, you know, if I'm Sony, I'm steering that ship straight at the moment. I'm not making any tacks onto a different course because it's working very well. You know, there's massive backlog orders for things like the FX6. Good luck trying to get one in most places around the world because of, you know, I mean, that's obviously because of chip shortages and things like that. But it's a high selling camera, and, you know, I would just stay the course for the moment.
Yeah. Well, it's almost as hard to get as a PS5. So, you know. I think for me, and I think this is pretty universal. It's not just specific to Sony, but if I were running Sony, because they are sort of the king of the hill when it comes to sensors, I would make an executive decision to develop a new sensor, full frame, that has crop modes, which Sony does really, really well. So I can shoot Super 35, 16, whatever it is. And I put the same fucking sensor in all of their cameras. I'm sick of it. So that's what I would do. I would just put the damn sensor in all of the cinema cameras and just say, we got the same sensor. They're all going to match. Okay? You're going to get these features in the mirrorless camera. You're going to get these features in the next one. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that's what I do. I'm going to keep it short.
Jam, you just got fired by the board.
I know, but I am the board, so it's okay. I'm the Elon Musk of Sony, so screw them. I don't sleep, so it's fine. No. All right. Canon. So where do we go, Caleb, with Canon?
Canon. Oh man. I think similar to Sony and what Matt said, they're killing it on the cinema camera front.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's much. I think the popularity of the C70, I hope more cameras like that come out, period. But I think that's a really interesting. I don't know if there's something someone's got to change their maybe there's a battery somewhere in here. I hear beeping. Yeah, I don't know. Cinema camera wise, I think they're pretty strong. I would love to see some kind of funky, fun something underneath the C70. Which it sounds like that might be coming, and I hope it's not just the R5C.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, I just want the cinema camera love to keep trickling down. I don't see why like something like this, the GH6 I just want little tiny cinema cameras. So it'd be fun to see something like that. But I think they're doing pretty good. Yeah, I would say similar to what Matt said about Sony. They're in a good spot right now.
Matt?
I don't know if I have much else to add there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, similar to Sony in some ways. You know, they're it's funny to watch Canon and Sony because they sort of go backwards and forwards, you know, making very similar sort of style cameras in sort of different areas.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, probably something like the R5C is an interesting camera because it really probably is the first, what you could truly call a hybrid mirrorless, in terms of, you know, it's good at both things, at video and stills, where traditionally most mirrorless hybrids are created, you know, primarily for stills. I mean, I guess we could say the GH6 is more of a video-centric camera than it is a stills camera. So I think that's probably maybe what Canon might continue to do, is to try and look at that area. I think, you know, we look at it all the time and think there's way too many models, you know, in the lineup. There's 1,000 different cameras down in these areas. You know, you look at the as you said before, Caleb, the Sony A series. There's a million different variations of that camera, but they're there for a reason. It's obviously because they sell, and these companies are, you know, they're not stupid. They're doing their market research, and they're seeing that for that sort of entry level, lower level tier, there's a huge people who are using, say, an FX9 or a Venice or a C500 or C300 Mark III or whatever. There's a huge there at that lower end for content creators, and so that's where a lot of these companies are now focused. Obviously, you know, you can make things cheaper by selling a lot more. You know, certain cinema cameras are always going to be expensive because you're not going to sell enough of them to recoup your costs, and you can't make them at a certain price. And as Caleb said before as well, you know, there's a baseline as to a point of how much you can actually sell something for before you're sort of starting to lose money or you're not making it. So
we're starting to lose you there, Matt. I don't know if there's some audio. Sounds like your cable's not fully plugged in, or your wireless is going out. If that is
dropping.
Wireless, I'm not
sure.
It
is dropping a little bit. Yeah. So I mean, I think for me, while that's getting sorted, I think for me, for Canon, and again, it's a little bit universal here. What I'd really like to see is I'd like to see a standardization in a product line. And I see the ENG market as a totally separate thing, though we are starting to see the convergence of those, especially because the autofocus systems are getting so good. You know, we see that in sports, and I don't always love what I'm seeing in sports. I don't think it's always effective to have, you know, an F2 image coming off of a football player when they're running towards the camera. It just doesn't look real to me, right? It's just weird. But I'd love to see a standardization in sensors. You look at the C70, C300 Mark III, you look at the C500 Mark II, you look at all those cameras, and they don't all match. So that's a challenge. And I think each company has unique features in their cameras. It almost would be better for me to be able to analyze the secret sauce, the look of the camera, and say that everybody has variable ND, everybody has a great, you know, audio system inside of the camera. You know, people are adding things like 32-bit float audio to the camera system. There's a lot of things that can still be integrated into these amazing cameras that could be things that differentiate a camera company from another in terms of the features. But if all the camera companies had these base features, what would it be that would make them unique? It would be the image that the camera produces, because they can all shoot all these frame rates and things like that. I kind of like that Phantom's in the space they're in, and that they have that uniqueness. We've kind of capped out at 240 as kind of this frame rate. And, you know, the people who are shooting on Phantom cameras, they know how to shoot on Phantom cameras, you know, and forget about the whole tech side of it. You know, you have to be a Phantom tech. It takes a lot of knowledge about lighting and shutter speed and exposure and things like that to do what the people who use those cameras do well, right? That's not just we'll just throw it up and we'll shoot this thing at 1,000 frames per second. It takes a certain knowledge to be able to do that type of tabletop or that slow-mo stuff when you're doing exteriors and things like that. But I would like to see that more from these other camera companies. But I do think that ultimately it boils down to the image that the camera produces. Is that something that you like? And is that something that you can work with in post? I'd love the flexibility of having all of the codecs available, but there's wars out there, you know. Blackmagic's never going to do certain things with their products that Atomos are going to do if you want to record externally, and not every camera company is going to license the same codecs. So we're going to have Cinema Raw Light in Canon cameras, where I'd like to have other options. And we're going to have Blackmagic Raw and Blackmagic cameras, which I'd like to see, honestly, in more cameras. And I'd love ProRes RAW to be more robust in the entire ecosystem from capture to post-production. It's not going to happen. But if I had my way, I'd probably do similar things at Canon that I would do at Sony. That's what I got for you.
Nice. Yeah, I like it. So you're like, everyone uses the exact same sensor no matter what. I'm like, stop making fancy, expensive ones and make really interesting little weird cameras. And Matt's, you know, just kind of like,
he's going out to lunch
right in the middle.
He's like, yeah, I'm just gonna, yeah. He's like Panasonic, they screwed up, and
you know, they're doing a good job, so they should just stay the same. And Panasonic's got to giddy up. I like it. I love it.
That's the way it goes.
Oh my goodness! And just like that,
it's 4:00.
It's amazing.
Matt, do you have your audio back up? Or are you off? You're off. I can't hear you. I don't know if you need to swap the batteries. We wanted like a sign off from you if possible. We also, by the way, for Matt, it's like I don't know. It's breakfast time. He's coming in. He sent me a text and he's like, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to set up in time. So I hear some noise. Things are happening. So
can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Are.
2, 3,
Yeah, you're coming back. You're coming back. All right, great. So let's do our sign off. Matt's in love with the Amira look. Who isn't? We all like it. Oh, look at this. My phone is blowing up here. Caleb, any final thoughts for this week? And then we have to...
you know, appreciate y'all. Thanks for hanging out. And, looking forward to seeing what's next in this wild, wild world.
A lot of things. Matt, any final words? Your mic is still getting funky, but it's all right. I think this is either a connector problem with the pack or something, or it's a battery issue. Oh, there you go. Go for it. Don't move.
Connector pack. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. No real final thoughts. Thanks for having me on, as always.
Yeah.
Nice to talk to you guys.
I miss our weekly
hopefully
show.
Hopefully can see you in person one day.
That would be great. Yeah. Love to have some more ramen with you in Japan one day. So it'll happen. It will happen at an Interbee in the very near or very far future, or somewhere else in this world. I'm not going to NAB this year, but maybe next year, and we'll see how it all goes. Final thoughts from me. Thank you, everybody in the chat. I know we weren't going into everybody's comments, but people were replying to each other a lot. Next week, Wednesday, March 2nd, is our first film photography challenge. And as you know, it's 2 black and white photographs, 1 daylight, natural light, 1 low light or nighttime photograph shot on film, no crop. You can adjust the image a little bit in post in terms of exposure levels if you want. Put an S-curve on it if you feel so inclined, but don't crop the image. And get your submissions into photoclub@thec47.com before next Wednesday. Really, the 28th of February is the drop date. Don't forget, there's no leap year this year. We go from February 28th to March 1st. Happens every year, except for every 4 years. And looking forward to it. We've got some submissions. Get your film out there. And I'm going to sign off and try to get some low light photographs before I go to lab tomorrow. Thanks again, Matt. As always, let's have you on a little bit more. There's that logo up there in that top left corner, and we're happy to have you on and chat about some more stuff. And it's really nice to get another perspective. And if you want to know more about the GH6, watch Caleb's video, read Matt's article on newsshooter.com, and I'll see everybody next week. Thanks for everything, and see you guys soon.